I didn't recognize my own sister at first, and that's the part that still wrecks me. 2 years of grief, 2 years of missing her, and when I finally saw her face again, standing in a doorway I was never supposed to find, my brain just refused. It couldn't load the information. It kept trying to hand me a different explanation. A stranger who looked similar. A trick of the light. Anything other than what I was actually seeing. But it was her, it was Jess. And she was alive. And my husband was walking through her front door like he'd done it 1,000 times before. My name is Mara Sutton. I'm 29 years old. I'm an insurance adjuster based in Cincinnati, Ohio, which means my entire job is looking at situations that seem straightforward on the surface and finding the thing underneath that doesn't add up. I'm telling you that because I want you to understand. I am professionally trained to detect when a story has holes in it. I do it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I'm good at it. And I still didn't see this coming. Not even close. If you're new here, welcome. Please subscribe before we go any further, because this story goes places I still haven't fully processed, and you're gonna want to be here for all of it. Now let me take you back. Not far, I promise. I'm not going to bore you with backstory. Just far enough that what comes next actually lands the way it deserves to. My sister's name was Jenna. Jenna Marie Sutton, 3 years younger than me, the louder and messier and more magnetic version of everything I tried to be. She was the kind of person who remembered the names of every waiter who ever served her, who cried at commercials about dogs, who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 4 new best friends. She was also chaotic in ways that drove me insane. Borrowed money and forgot, canceled plans last minute, disappeared for weeks when life got too heavy, and then reappeared like nothing happened. She was complicated. She was mine. She died, supposedly, 22 months ago. Accidental drowning on a lake trip with friends. The kind of accident that feels too random to be anything other than what it is. Her body was recovered. I was called to identify her. I drove 4 hours alone because there was no one else. Stood under fluorescent lights in a county facility and looked at my sister's face through a pane of glass. I said, yes, that's her. I came home, I planned a funeral, I sat through it. I went back to work 3 weeks later because staying home alone felt like suffocating, and I have been grieving her every single day since. So I need you to really understand what it meant, what it cost, to be standing outside that apartment building in the cold on a Wednesday evening, looking up at the 4th floor, watching my husband knock on a door, and watching that door open and watching my dead sister answer it. Now let me back up 2 months, because that's when the thing that eventually broke everything wide open first started pulling at me. It started with Ryan's gym schedule. My husband Ryan had been going to the gym 3 evenings a week for years. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, nothing unusual about it. But around 2 months ago, the rhythm shifted. As he started going on Tuesdays too. Fine. People change routines. Then on a Thursday, he said he was staying late at the office. Fine. Then a second Thursday. Then he missed dinner twice in 1 week, without a heads-up text, which he'd never done before, not once in 4 years of marriage, because Ryan is the kind of person who over-communicates, who texts when he's leaving, who gives 10-minute warnings. Missing dinner without a word was not Ryan. When I mentioned it, he apologized immediately. Said he got caught up, said it wouldn't happen again. And it was so clean, that apology, so calm, no defensiveness, no irritation at being questioned, just smooth, like a rehearsed line delivered with just enough imperfection to sound genuine. I worked in insurance for 6 years. I know what a rehearsed line sounds like. I didn't push. I filed it. Then 3 weeks ago, I picked up his gym bag to move it out of the hallway. We have a dog, Cooper, and if Cooper gets into the gym bag, it's a whole thing, and something fell out of the front pocket. A folded piece of paper. Not a receipt. Not a gym card. A handwritten note. 4 words. Same time next week. No name. No context. His handwriting, I thought. But then I looked again. It wasn't his handwriting. It was close. Same slant, similar size. But not his. I put it back exactly where it was. I didn't say a word. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder and more focused than anger. The part of my brain that processes claims and finds the inconsistency in the paperwork. That part switched on and did not switch off again. I started watching. Not obsessively. Carefully, I noticed he started clearing his browser history. I noticed he took his phone to the bathroom even when he was only in there for 2 minutes. I noticed he had a new contact saved under a name that was just a first initial T. And when I casually asked who T was, he said it was a guy from work named Todd, without any hesitation, without looking up from his plate, without the micropause that most people have when they're scrambling for a cover. He just answered. And the answer was too ready. 6 days ago, he told me he had a work thing on Wednesday evening. Client dinner. Downtown. He'd probably be back by 9. I said fine. Have fun, I'll make something easy for dinner. And then I got in my car at 5:15, and I drove to his office, and I waited. He left at 5:52. He did not go downtown, he drove northeast. I followed him, 2 cars back, nothing dramatic, just steady, and he pulled into a parking garage in a neighborhood called Glenwood, which has nothing to do with any client dinner anywhere. He parked on level 2. I parked on level 3 and walked down. I followed him 3 blocks on foot. He walked like someone who knew exactly where they were going. No phone out for directions, no hesitation at intersections. He'd walked this route before. Many times. He stopped at an apartment building, punched in a door code I couldn't see from my distance, and went inside. I stood on the sidewalk and looked up. 4th floor. Unit 408. The lights were already on. I crossed the street. There's a small coffee shop directly across from that building. I didn't plan that, it was just there. And I went inside and stood near the window with a coffee I didn't drink and watched the building's exterior. 15 minutes passed. Then a light came on in the hallway. I could see the outline of the window from across the street, and I thought, go, now, before you lose your nerve. I walked back across. I took the stairs to 4 because I didn't want to stand in an elevator. I walked down the hall. I stopped outside Unit 408. I could hear muffled voices inside. 2 of them. A man and a woman. I stood there for longer than I want to admit. My hand was on the wall. My heart was doing something strange and irregular in my chest. And then something made me step back. Not fear. Instinct. The same instinct that tells me when a claim is fraudulent before I can prove it. Just a quiet inner voice saying, you are not ready for what is on the other side of this door. Collect more information first. So I left. I went back downstairs. I sat in my car in the parking garage with the engine off and the ceiling lights flickering above me. I was going to come back. I decided that in the parking garage. I was going to come back on a day when I was ready, when I had more pieces, when I understood enough of the shape of this thing to face it directly. I came back 2 days later. Friday. I positioned myself at the coffee shop again at 5:45, and I waited. And at 6:02, my husband's car came back into view. Same garage. Same walk. Same door code. This time, I was right behind him when he knocked on 408. I was 4 feet away, pressed against the wall just past the turn in the hallway, and I heard the door open, and I heard my husband say, "Hey, how are you feeling?" And I heard a woman's voice answer. And my blood went cold. Because I knew that voice. I had known that voice my entire life. I had cried over the absence of that voice for 22 months. I stepped out from the wall just far enough to see. The door was still half open. Ryan was stepping inside. And in the gap of the doorway, face catching the light from the hallway, stood Jenna, my sister. My dead sister, standing there with a half-eaten cracker in one hand and a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, looking tired and thin and completely, undeniably Impossibly alive. She didn't see me. The door closed. I walked back to the stairwell and sat down on the top step and pressed both hands against my knees to stop them from shaking. Something enormous had just broken open. I didn't know the shape of it yet. I didn't know how deep it went, who else was involved, how long it had been running, what it was going to cost me, but I knew one thing with complete and total certainty. My sister had not drowned, and my husband had known. I didn't confront Ryan that night. I know that's the part where most people would say, why didn't you just walk back up there and knock on that door and demand answers? And I hear that. I do. But here's what you have to understand about the place my head was in as I drove home. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't even hurt yet. I was operating entirely on that cold, focused frequency that takes over when my brain decides that emotion is a luxury it can't afford right now. I've had it happen before on big claims at work. The ones where you realize halfway through the file that something is seriously wrong. Your body just shifts into a different mode. Quieter, more deliberate. Every question has to be asked in the right order, or the whole thing collapses. So I went home. I fed Cooper. I made pasta. I sat at the kitchen table and ate it alone. And when Ryan walked in at 8:40, smelling like someone else's fabric softener, and said, "The client dinner ran long. I'm exhausted," I looked up at him and smiled and said, "Save you some pasta?" And he said, "Sure," and I got up and made him a plate. I watched him eat, and I thought, how long have you known she was alive? Because that was the question that mattered most. Not why, not how long. If he'd found out recently, weeks maybe, that was one version of this story. A version where maybe he was as shocked as I was supposed to be. Where maybe he was trying to figure out what to do, where maybe there was still something salvageable. I didn't believe that version. But I allowed it to exist in my mind, as a possibility, because I'd been wrong before, and I wasn't willing to close doors before I had evidence. If he'd known for months. If he'd known from the beginning. That was a different story entirely. That was a story with no version, where Ryan is still someone I know. The next morning, I did the thing that I almost never do, which is call in to work and say, I'm not feeling well. I needed a day, and I didn't have a better cover story. My manager was fine about it. I hung up and opened my laptop at the kitchen table in the quiet of an empty house, and I started going back through everything I could access. Our joint bank account first. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just looking. The way you scan a document when you don't know where the problem is yet. January through October. Regular expenses. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, streaming services, car payments. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obviously wrong. Then I pulled up the credit card. The one we share. And on a Tuesday in March, 7 months ago, there was a charge I didn't recognize. $214 to something listed as Hadley Property Group. I had never heard of Hadley Property Group. Ryan had never mentioned it. I stared at the charge for a long time. I searched the name. It came back as a property management company. Residential leases. Cincinnati and surrounding areas. My hands went very still on the keyboard. A property management company. 7 months ago. And an apartment that already had settled in furniture. And a blanket on the couch. And a half-eaten cracker. And a woman who had been living there long enough to look completely comfortable in the space. 7 months. I went back to the bank records. I started going further back. Looking specifically now. Not just scanning. Really looking. In February, a cash withdrawal for $600. That wasn't unusual on its own. Ryan carries cash sometimes, not often, but occasionally. In March, another cash withdrawal, $800. In April, $650. May, $700. Regular. Structured. Always cash. Never the same amount twice. which is exactly how you avoid pattern detection on a joint account. You vary the numbers just enough that it reads as normal fluctuation. I sat back in my chair, and Cooper put his head in my lap, and I scratched behind his ears without really feeling it. 7 months of rent. 7 months of cash withdrawals that never looked alarming because they were carefully varied. 7 months of a schedule that had slowly, gradually shifted to make room for Wednesday evenings and the occasional Tuesday. This had not been thrown together in a panic. This had been planned, built, maintained by my husband. For my sister. For Jenna, who everyone, including me, believed was dead. I needed to know about the body. I know that sounds clinical. It sounds like the wrong thing to focus on. But bear with me, because this is actually the piece that opened everything else up. Because if Jenna was alive, then what I identified in that morgue, what I said yes to, what I signed my name under, was not her. And that meant one of two things. Either it was an unrelated body misidentified, which happens but is extraordinarily rare, or someone had arranged for a body to be in that room, in that condition, looking enough like Jenna to get me to confirm it through a pane of glass while I was in shock. I didn't even want to think about the second option. It was too large, too cold, too deliberate. So I called the county records office. I told them I was following up on a death record from 22 months ago for a family member. I gave Jenna's full name, her date of birth, the approximate date of the incident. The woman on the phone put me on hold for 4 minutes and came back and told me the record existed, that a death certificate had been filed, and that the cause of death was listed as accidental drowning. I asked if I could request a copy of the full record. She said yes, it would take 5 to 7 business days by mail. I said that was fine, and gave her my work address because I was not having that envelope come to the house. After I hung up, I sat very still for a while, and then something occurred to me that I hadn't considered yet, something that should have occurred to me the moment I saw Jenna in that doorway but hadn't, because my brain was too overloaded in that moment to chase every thread. When Jenna died, I was her next of kin, which meant I had handled everything. The death certificate, the estate, the small amount of savings she'd had in her account, which I had, at her prior request, transferred to a charity she'd cared about. There had been no life insurance policy. I'd checked because I needed to close her accounts properly, and there was nothing. Or I had thought there was nothing. I opened a new browser tab and searched her name with the words, life insurance beneficiary. I couldn't access her policies directly. Those records aren't public. But I could access something else. 6 months before Jenna died, she had taken out a notarized document. I found a reference to it in a small court filing that was publicly indexed, naming a beneficiary update on a financial account. The beneficiary she'd named was not me. It was a name I didn't recognize. A woman's name. I wrote it down, folded the paper, tucked it into my work bag, and then Ryan's car pulled into the driveway, and I closed every tab and opened a recipe website, and when he walked in, I was sitting there looking at a pasta bake like that was all I'd been doing for the last 3 hours. Feeling better? He said. A little, I said. You hungry? He said he'd grab something himself. He kissed the top of my head. I felt my jaw tighten. He went to the fridge. I watched his back, and I thought, you have been paying rent on an apartment for 7 months. You have been lying to me in this kitchen. You have sat at this table and looked at me and performed the role of a husband, while somewhere on the other side of this city, my sister, my dead sister, has been eating crackers on a couch and waiting for your Wednesday visit. How long, Ryan? How long? There's a certain kind of dread that doesn't feel like dread at first. It feels like focus. It feels like clarity. You think you're doing okay because you're functioning, going through the motions, making dinner, answering emails, sleeping next to someone without screaming. But what's actually happening is your mind is building a wall between you and the full weight of what you know, because if you let all of it in at once, it will flatten you completely. And you can't afford to be flattened. Not yet. Not before you have the whole picture. I stayed behind that wall for the next 9 days. During those 9 days, I did the following things. I went to work every day and did my job well. I made dinner 4 times. I watched television next to my husband on the couch 3 evenings. I laughed at something he said on Saturday and hated myself for it 2 seconds later. And in every quiet moment, every lunch break, every hour after he fell asleep, I kept pulling threads. The name on that beneficiary document, the woman's name I didn't recognize, was Carla DeMoss. I searched her. It took a few days of digging through public records and social media before I found the connection, and when I found it, I had to read it 3 times because my brain kept rejecting it. Carla DeMoss was not a stranger. Carla DeMoss was the aunt of one of the friends who'd been on that camping trip, the trip where Jenna drowned. So let me draw that line slowly, because I want you to feel it the same way I did. Jenna allegedly drowns on a trip with friends. One of those friends has an aunt. That aunt is the beneficiary on a financial account. Jenna updated 6 months before the trip. That's not a coincidence. That's a thread. And a thread means there's a fabric underneath it, and a fabric means this thing was woven. I started looking into the friends from the trip. There were 3 of them. 2 women and a man. I'd met all 3 briefly over the years. They were Jenna's friends, not mine, and Jenna and I had been going through a rough patch when she died, which is one of the things I've had to live with. The last conversation we had before that trip was not a good one. We argued about money she owed me. I said things I regretted. She left, and I thought we'd patch it up when she got back. She didn't come back, except now she had. Of the 3 friends on the trip, 2 had moved out of state within 6 months of Jenna's death. That struck me now, in a way it hadn't at the time. People move, it's normal. But both of them, within 6 months, in opposite directions. One to Portland, one to Atlanta. It felt like distance being put between themselves and something they didn't want to be near anymore. The 3rd friend, the man, whose name was Darren, was still local. I found him on LinkedIn. He worked at a landscaping company. And then I found something else, a small claims court filing from about 14 months ago, in which Darren was listed as the defendant. The plaintiff was a name I didn't recognize, and the nature of the dispute was listed as contract disagreement, services rendered. Vague. Deliberately vague, the way things are when someone files the minimum required detail. The filing had been withdrawn before any hearing. Settled out of court. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know if it connects, but I wrote it down. And then the death certificate arrived at my office. 5 business days exactly. I opened it at my desk with the door closed, which is unusual for me. I work in an open floor plan office and I never close my door. But nobody said anything. I pulled the document out of the envelope and I read it slowly. Cause of death: asphyxiation due to drowning. Manner: accidental. Place of death: County of Fairfield, Ohio. And then the physical description of the deceased. Height: 5'4". Hair: brown. Eyes: brown. Jenna is 5'4". Hair: brown. Eyes: brown. That part matched. But then, weight: 142 pounds. I stopped. Jenna was not 142 pounds when she died. I know this because we're sisters, and because 4 months before the trip, we'd been at our cousin's wedding together, and Jenna had complained, jokingly, she was always joking, that she'd dropped below 120 and her dress wasn't fitting right and she needed to eat more pasta. She was 118. Maybe 120 at most. 142 and 118 are not close. Not close enough to be explained by scale variance or measurement error. That is 20+ pounds of difference. On a 5'4" frame, that's a different body. I stared at that number for a long time. If the body in that morgue was not Jenna, and I was now fairly certain it was not, then I had identified a woman I didn't know. A stranger. And if someone had placed that stranger in that room for me to identify, then one of 2 possibilities existed. Either that woman was already dead, and her body was used, or that woman had been made dead specifically for this. I felt sick. I closed the document and put it back in the envelope, and put the envelope in my bag, and went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and breathed. I wanted to believe the first option. I needed to believe the first option. But a carefully planned fake death, a structured rental payment, 7 months of rehearsed lies, a beneficiary switched to a connected name 6 months before the incident. This was not a chaotic plan. This was not improvised. Someone had thought about this for a long time, and the question that had been sitting at the center of everything, the one I had been circling for days, came back with new weight. What was Jenna running from? Because that was the reframe I'd been slowly arriving at. Not, what did Ryan do to Jenna? But what was Jenna trying to escape from? And did Ryan help her? Or did Ryan build the escape for her? And was our life, our marriage, our house, was any of that just a structure Ryan maintained while the real thing he was managing was somewhere else entirely? I drove home that evening and Ryan was already there. He'd made dinner, which he sometimes did on Thursdays. He'd made the chicken thing I like, the one with the lemon sauce, and the table was set, and Cooper was sitting beside the stove looking hopeful, and I stood in the doorway and looked at all of it. The dinner, the dog, the husband, the kitchen, and thought about how much work it takes to maintain a lie this size. You have to care about the set dressing. You have to keep the flowers watered. Rough day? Ryan said, looking at my face. Just tired, I said. I sat down. I ate the chicken. It was good. I told him so. He smiled and said he was glad. And somewhere across the city, my sister ate dinner in an apartment my husband was paying for, and the three of us existed inside a secret none of us had named out loud yet. I had a plan. I want to say that clearly, because the next part requires you to trust that I wasn't acting on impulse. I was acting on calculation. I'd spent 11 days collecting information, and I had reached the point where I knew enough to move, but not yet enough to go to anyone official. Not the police. Not a lawyer. Not yet. Because the moment this became official, I would lose control of it. And control was the only thing I had. I was going to talk to Jenna, not through the apartment door, not with Ryan present, not in a way that gave either of them the chance to coordinate their story before I heard it. I needed to get to her alone, and to do that, I needed to know her schedule. So I went back to Glenwood. Not on a Wednesday. Ryan's day. On a Monday morning, early, before work, I parked down the street from the apartment building at 7:45 a.m. and I waited. And at 8:20, the door to the building opened and Jenna walked out. She was wearing a coat I didn't recognize, carrying a reusable grocery bag, moving quickly with her head slightly down. She looked thinner than I remembered. She looked tired in a way that wasn't just about sleep. A deeper tired. A long haul tired. The kind that comes from carrying something heavy for a long time. I watched her walk to the corner store 2 blocks away. I waited. She came out 12 minutes later with the bag fuller and walked back. I did the same thing on Tuesday. She came out at 8:35, same walk, different store, back in 15 minutes. I had her routine. Wednesday morning, I called in late to work. Said I had an appointment, and I was in position by 8:15. She came out at 8:28, and this time, I got out of the car. I want to tell you that I had a speech prepared. I want to tell you I knew what I was going to say. But what actually happened was, I crossed the street, and I got within 10 feet of her, and she looked up and saw me. And her face did something that was worse than any expression I'd prepared myself for. She didn't look shocked. She looked relieved, like she'd been waiting for this. "Mara," she said. Not a question. "Yeah," I said. We stood on the sidewalk looking at each other for a long moment. And then she said, very quietly, "How did you find me?" "Followed Ryan," I said. She closed her eyes for a second. Nodded slowly. Like that made sense, like she'd known it was a possibility. "We need to talk," I said. "I know," she said. "We went to the coffee shop across the street." "I know, same one." And we sat in the back corner, and for a moment neither of us said anything. She kept her hands wrapped around her cup, and she looked at the table, and I looked at her face, and I thought about every time I'd looked at a photograph of her over the past 22 months, and felt that particular hollow ache of someone who is gone. And then I asked the only question that mattered first. "Are you safe?" She looked up, and I saw something cross her face. Surprise, maybe, or something softer than that, like she hadn't expected that to be the first thing. "Yes," she said. "I'm safe." "Okay," I said. "Then start talking." And she did. Here is what Jenna told me, in pieces, over the next hour and 40 minutes. I'm going to give it to you the way I received it. Not perfectly linear, not cleanly packaged, because that's not how truth comes out when someone's been holding it for almost 2 years. Jenna had been in debt. Not the ordinary kind, not credit cards and student loans, the kind of debt that doesn't come with a payment plan, the kind you accrue when you get involved with the wrong people in the wrong situation, and then try to extract yourself, and find out that extraction has a price. She wouldn't tell me the full scope of it. I think she still can't, but she told me enough. There were people who believed she owed them something she couldn't pay, and those people were not the kind who send letters. She'd gone to Ryan. I want to pause here, because this is the part I had to sit with the longest, and I want to be honest about what it felt like. She'd gone to my husband. Not to me, to my husband. And I have turned that over so many times. Was it because she thought he'd handle it better? Was it because she knew I'd try to talk her out of it? Was it because asking me would have meant admitting something she wasn't ready to admit to her big sister? I don't have a clean answer. I don't know if I ever will. Ryan had come up with the plan, or a version of it. Jenna said it was collaborative, that she'd suggested disappearing and he'd figured out how to make it real. The body had not been... And here I felt the thing I'd been dreading shift into relief. The body had not been murdered. It had been a donation case. An unidentified woman who had died of natural causes, processed through a county facility, that Ryan had accessed through a contact he would not name to Jenna, and that Jenna would not name to me. The description was close enough on paper, and I, in my grief, in my shock, through a pane of glass, I had confirmed it. I had confirmed a stranger's body as my sister's. And I had done it because someone had built the situation to make me do exactly that. I sat with that for a moment before I asked the next question. "How long has Ryan known where you are?" "From the beginning," she said. "He set up the apartment. I know about the rent," I said. She looked at me. "Okay, what I don't know," I said, "is what he's getting out of it. Because Ryan doesn't do things without a reason, and this is not a small thing." Jenna was quiet for a long moment. She picked up her coffee and put it down without drinking, and then she said something that reoriented everything I thought I understood. "He's not doing it out of kindness, Mara. He's doing it because if I come back, everything he did to make this happen becomes a criminal record." I stared at her. "He's not protecting me," she said. "He's protecting himself." And I didn't fully understand that until about 4 months ago. I thought about the note I'd found in his gym bag. Same time next week. Not his handwriting. Close, but not his. I thought about the cash withdrawals. Structured. Carefully varied. I thought about Ryan's voice when he said the Henderson project was running long. The smoothness of it. The zero hesitation. He wasn't helping Jenna disappear out of love or loyalty. He was maintaining a situation that kept both of them locked into a secret that protected him more than it protected her. I reached across the table, and I took my sister's hand. "Okay," I said, "then we're gonna fix this. But we're going to do it right." She looked at me like she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone on her side. I hadn't forgotten. I'd just been kept away from her long enough to stop being able to reach her. That ended now. I need to tell you something about the 11 days between that coffee shop conversation and what happened next. Those 11 days were the strangest of my life. I was living in 2 realities simultaneously. The one where I came home every evening and made dinner and watched television with Ryan and asked about his day and listened to him lie with a fluency that honestly should have impressed me. and the one where, in every quiet moment, I was working. I'd contacted a lawyer. Not through any channel Ryan could see. No searches on my home Wi-Fi, no calls from my regular phone. I borrowed a colleague's phone and called from the parking garage at work. I explained what I had: the bank records, the death certificate discrepancy, the payment history, and asked what my options were. She asked me several questions I wasn't expecting and told me several things I needed to hear. The primary one being, before I did anything that made Ryan aware of what I knew, I needed documentation. Not suspicion. Documentation. I had documentation. I also had Jenna. Jenna had agreed to come forward. It took her a while to get there. Not because she didn't want to, but because she was scared. And scared people need time. And I'd spent 2 years without her, and I could spend 11 more days being patient. She'd spent 22 months living in a box that Ryan had built for her, thinking she had no exit that didn't implicate her further. What she hadn't realized was that Ryan's involvement created a leverage point that actually protected her. The messier it got for him, the more negotiating power she had. My lawyer explained that clearly. That helped. On a Wednesday evening, 11 days after the coffee shop, I did not make dinner. I sat at the kitchen table when Ryan walked in, and I had the bank records, the printed death certificate, and a copy of the Hadley Property Group charge sitting in a neat stack in front of me. Ryan saw my face first. Before he even registered what was on the table, he saw my face, and something in his expression, just for a fraction of a second, went very still. "Hey," he said, carefully. "Sit down," I said. He looked at the table. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "How long?" I said. That was it. That was my opening. Not an accusation, not a confrontation, just the question I'd been sitting with for weeks. He looked at the records. He looked at me, and I watched him calculate. I could actually see it, the way you can see someone going through their options. And then his shoulders dropped slightly, just slightly, and he said, "From the beginning." I exhaled. "She came to me 6 weeks before the trip," he said. "She needed help, and she didn't want to put it on you. You two were fighting. She said you were already stressed. She said she couldn't ask you. So, you built a fake death instead," I said. It wasn't that simple." "How simple was it, Ryan?" He was quiet. "Was it worth it?" I said. 6 months of planning, 2 years of maintenance, watching me grieve, sitting next to me on this couch knowing what you knew. Was it worth it? He didn't answer. And I think in that silence was the actual truth. That it hadn't been worth it for a long time. That he'd been living in his own trap. That the man who'd built a careful structure to protect himself had spent 2 years watching that structure slowly become a prison. I'm not going to tell you I felt sorry for him. I didn't. I'm not going to tell you I was cruel either. I wasn't. I was calm. I was the calmest I have ever been in my life. Which sounds impossible, but when you've spent 2 weeks preparing for a moment, the moment itself becomes strangely quiet. I told him I'd spoken to a lawyer. I told him what would happen next. I told him that Jenna had agreed to come forward, and that how complicated this became for him was largely dependent on how cooperative he was from this point. He sat at the kitchen table and listened. He didn't argue, he didn't defend, he just listened, and when I was done, he said, very quietly, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know. That's not the same as forgiveness. I want to be clear about that." Jenna came forward 8 days later. It was not simple. It involved conversations with law enforcement, with my lawyer, with Ryan's lawyer, with the county records office, with the facility where the unidentified body had been processed. It was paperwork and waiting rooms and difficult phone calls, and more than once I sat in a parking lot somewhere and just cried. Not about Ryan, but about the 22 months. About the grief that had been real, even though the death wasn't. About the argument we'd had before she left. The money, the things I said, the things she said, about all the time that had been taken from us. Jenna is alive. I want to say that again because I still need to sometimes. She is alive. She's not in the Glenwood apartment anymore. She's staying somewhere safer, while the legal process moves. We talk every day. Sometimes we don't say much. Sometimes I call her just to hear the sound of her breathing on the other end of the phone. Ryan and I are separated. I'm not going to get into the legal details because they're ongoing, but I will say that our lawyers are talking and I am not making it easy for him, and I don't feel bad about that. Cooper is with me. Obviously, Cooper was never a question, and this is the thing I keep coming back to. The thing I want to leave you with, because I don't want this to just be a story about betrayal. I want it to be about the moment I chose information over reaction. The moment I sat outside that apartment building and said, "Not yet. You don't know enough. Go learn the rest." Because the easier thing, the emotionally satisfying thing, would have been to knock on that door right then and fall apart right there in the hallway. But the better thing was to wait, to collect, to understand what I was actually dealing with before I dealt with it. My sister is alive because I was patient. She's in a better position because I did the work before I made a move. And I know who I married. Really know, because I stopped accepting smooth explanations and started looking underneath them. If something in your life feels off, I just need you to hear this. Trust that feeling. Don't perform normalcy while the thing underneath is growing. Ask the question, read the document, follow the car. Not to confirm your worst fear, but to give yourself the truth. Because the truth, no matter how hard it is always the thing you can actually work with. If you stayed with me this whole time, thank you, genuinely. This was not easy to put into words, and it means everything that you're here for it. If this story hit you somewhere real, please leave a comment below. Tell me what part got you the most. I read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, please do. There's so much more to come, and I promise every story is worth staying for. Like this video if you're glad Jenna's alive. Because honestly, so am I.